Hi, I'm Ali from Runner's World, and this is my comparison of the New Balance Rebel version 5 and the Asics Novablast 5. The Rebel and the Novablast are two excellent daily trainers that we are big fans of here at Runner's World. I have probably clocked up over 100 kilometers on each shoe, and they are shoes that I would recommend to a lot of runners. However, there are some key differences between the two. So if you are currently deciding between the two, make sure you keep watching because I'm going to break everything down in this video. If we dive into key stats, the Novablast 5 is the bigger of the two shoes. So it's got 40.5 millimeters of foam in the heel and 32.5 millimeters at the forefoot, giving it a 8 millimeter drop overall. This is also a UK 8 and it weighs in at 255 grams. In comparison, the Rebel is slightly lower stack. It's got 35 millimeters in the heel and 29 millimeters at the forefoot, giving it a 6 millimeter drop overall. This is a UK 8.5 and it also weighs in at 219 grams, so it is slightly lighter than the Novablast 5. And then finally, in terms of price, the two are very, very similar and I think pretty reasonable for a daily trainer. £135 for the Novablast and £140 for the Rebel V5. Okay, so how do the shoes fit? If we start off with the Novablast, this is actually a UK 8 because that's a test sample I was sent. I would say, even though I've had no issues with sort of bruised toenails, rubbing, anything like that, I would like slightly more room at the top of the toe box. So for me, this is a true to size shoe. I would ideally have an 8.5 in this one, and I would go for your own true to size in the Novablast yourself. I would say the Novablast fits sort of on the standard to wider size, particularly around the midfoot area too. There's a nice amount of width at the top of the toe box as well. So if you're someone with slightly wider feet, maybe higher arches, higher volume feet, I think you're going to get on well with the Novablast. I think in terms of this upper, I would like to see a little bit more flexibility in the midfoot area, but that is a minor gripe and it doesn't deter from the actual running experience that much. You've also got a new lacing system on the version 5 and the tongue is nicely gusseted, minimally padded, not too much, but enough to keep you comfortable. However, around the heel collar, there is ample padding, and that's probably one of the biggest differences between the two already, is you have a very cushioned and supportive ankle collar on the Novablast 5. So in terms of the upper on the Rebel V5, we've got this Phantom Fit upper, which is sort of a heat bonded mesh film. I would say even though the Rebel V5 is a slightly more speed-leaning daily trainer, it's not necessarily a foot-hugging upper. So you've actually got quite a bit of give to it. Again, this doesn't deter from the overall ride, but it's worth bearing in mind, I think, if you're someone that likes a slightly more closed-in feel around the whole foot, slightly more foot-hugging, then you're going to lean more towards the Novablast. If you're someone, I guess, who likes a bit more wiggle room, then you might like to go for the Rebel. I would say both shoes have a very similar level of padding on the tongue, both actually very premium, nice tongues. Where the key differences are, obviously, is on these heel collars. As you can see, the Rebel has significantly less padding around the heel collar than the Novablast 5. For me, I think it still has plenty of padding to keep you comfortable. I've worn these for sort of 20-mile long runs and I've had absolutely no issues with sort of Achilles irritation, hot spots. But as I said, if you're someone who likes to feel like you are well locked in, likes that extra bit of cushioning, particularly sensitive in that area, then you might lean slightly more towards the Novablast. Moving on to what the shoes are like to run in. If we start off with the Novablast, this has always been a sort of do-it-all daily trainer, something that you can wear for the large majority of your training. And I'd say the latest version, that's still absolutely true. Despite the fact that you've got 40.5 millimeters in the heel, sort of that does make the shoe more sort of max cushion shoe territory. I wouldn't say this feels like a max cushion shoe. When it's on your foot, it's still very smooth to run in, feels very soft and protective underfoot, but you've still got a good amount of dialed in connectedness with this, and it makes it, you know, really enjoyable for sort of daily easy miles, tempo runs, and longer miles. I think where I would just flag is that if you are someone who likes a slightly firmer, sort of snappier shoe for that speed-orientated work, you aren't going to find it here. This is definitely something that falls more on the sort of softer, easier side of the versatility spectrum. But as I said, I think this is still capable of handling some tempo work. So it's still very much a daily trainer, just one that sort of veers towards the more sort of softer, easier end of the spectrum. I think it's also worth calling out that the Novablast 5 works quite well for a variety of different runners. So if you're someone that lands further at the front of your foot, you've got this sort of trampoline-like pod on the bottom here, this sort of groove, which again helps to have a springy toe off. You've also got this quite pronounced rocker geometry at the front to roll you nicely onto your toes as well. Then if you're a heel striker like me, the heel is slightly more rounded at the back than the previous version, which again helps to add stability. You've also got an 8mm drop overall, so a nice fluid transition for you there. So overall, I think this is a nice versatile shoe that should work well for a variety of runners. Final thing to add with the ride on this one is that obviously because you have a bit more cushioning, I think this is going to work well for maybe slightly heavier runners. I think if you're worried about the shoe bottoming out, it's sometimes beneficial to have a little bit more cushioning underfoot. So I think heavier runners will really like this one. I also think beginners, if you're someone that really does want that sort of supportive cushioning, maybe you're buying a running shoe for the first time, I can see this appealing. My one big gripe with this shoe though is the outsole. So it has been updated slightly from the version 4. However, the outsole is still not Asics' sort of top tier Asics grip outsole. That's sort of reserved for its more expensive shoes like the Novablast. Instead, what you've got is slightly, I guess, less durable material. For that reason, I do find sort of in wet conditions, I did a lot of training with this over the winter months, and it is a lot more slippy. So I think that is where the Novablast definitely loses marks, is the grip, especially when you compare it to something like the Rebel V5. Moving on to the Rebel V5 then, I would say this is still a very versatile shoe. It is, however, probably lighter, more agile and more nimble than the Novablast 5. I would also say it maybe feels slightly more dialed in and connected on the run in terms of that ground feel, especially in the forefoot area where you've got sort of less foam underfoot here. You are just going to feel that slightly more sort of connected feeling as you're running versus something where you've got more foam packed in under the foot. So yeah, I think if you're someone who sort of prefers that more agile feeling, that's what I would lean towards this type of shoe. I think it's also worth calling out this midsole. So what you have in the Rebel V5 is a PEBA blend. So you do have some of the more responsive PEBA foam in the midsole here, and I would say that does make this a really sort of fun shoe to run in. It's soft underfoot, and I think there is a really good sense of control in the Rebel. I think this is something that you can use actually for several miles and really, really enjoy. And actually, I think that is sort of the key difference between the Rebel version 5 and the Rebel version 4. I think the Rebel V5 is now a shoe that can handle that sort of longer mileage. Whereas before, for sort of my longer runs, I probably would have leaned towards the Novablast 5. Whereas because you do have that little bit more foam underfoot now, slightly more cushioning on the ankle collar, on the tongue, it's a shoe that I now very comfortably can do long runs in. I've ran 20 miles or more sort of long marathon training runs in these, and I've had absolutely no issues in the comfort department. So even though it is less cushion perhaps than the Novablast, I think there's still ample here to keep you comfortable on the long run. Okay, so which should you get, the Asics Novablast 5 or the New Balance Rebel version 5? I think it's first worth saying that I think both shoes are excellent and you're getting a very fluid, dialed in, soft, protective ride from both shoes. They're also very versatile, so I think both shoes are capable of handling quite a variety of sessions and paces. I think personally, I would lean slightly more towards the Rebel, even though it's £5 extra. I think I just prefer a shoe that has that slight bit more nimbleness to it, is ever so slightly lighter. And like I said, even though you don't have quite as much cushioning underfoot and around the ankle collar as the Novablast, for me, there's still plenty to keep me comfortable over longer mileage. So this is perhaps the one that I would go for. I think if you're someone that prefers slightly more cushioning, maybe you prefer a max cushion shoe, but you're looking for something a little bit more versatile, then I think the Novablast 5 is perhaps more suited. I also think it's going to suit maybe beginners looking for that bit more support and stability, and also heavier runners as well who do want slightly more cushioning underfoot. I also think sort of when you compare the rides of the two, because you are getting that sort of PEBA blended midsole from the Rebel version 5, I would say I perhaps get a touch more responsiveness from this shoe. Don't get me wrong, the Novablast is very bouncy, but I think the sort of bouncy doesn't always mean responsive. And I think although this shoe is a lot of fun, I think this one just has the slight edge when it comes to maybe how often I would use it for sort of the faster leaning stuff. So there we have it. I hope this helps you decide between the two shoes. Let me know in the comments which one you prefer. And as always, don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more reviews from the Runners World team.